Hello and welcome to this second session of the online course Teaching to Difference and Diversity. This is a course for teachers and others who are interested in joining in a dialogue aimed at ensuring that the world's best practice in school education is provided for all children and young adolescents, irrespective of their individual differences. Each of the sessions in the course are designed so that people can watch them either in sequence as a whole course or as individual or clusters of sessions on particular topics. My name is Roger Marshall and I designed this course as a forum for sharing my ideas on inclusive education. I trust that you will find it interesting and useful. The first two sessions of the course make up Module 1. In the first session I outlined the course for you and shared with you my thoughts on the goals I have in mind for the course. In this session, I will first of all define and explore the concept of inclusive education. Secondly, reflect on its social justice agenda. And finally, consider the implications of this social justice agenda for the purpose and the approach to learning and teaching adopted in the course, as well as its intended audience. But first, let me tell you a little bit about where these ideas come from, and in doing so, a little bit about myself. The core view of social justice that I put forward here was formulated over a 6-year period from about 1990 to 1995. I'd been teaching for over 20 years by then, most of that time in schools set in low socioeconomic areas, both here in Australia, in Brisbane, and in the UK. I come to specialise in working with students who were either disengaging or at risk of disengaging from school. This work focused my attention on the issues of inclusion and social justice in education. In that 6-year period, I returned to formal studies and was enabled to clarify myself a theory of social justice and a practice framework that I found to be extremely valuable during the rest of my school-based career. In that time, I continued to focus on inclusive education and fostering social justice. It was increasingly clear to me, however, that my work as a head of department social justice and then as a deputy principal in high school, that the frameworks were far from complete. It's a source of some satisfaction to me that in the past 6 years since I finished full-time work in schools, I've had the opportunity to work further on the theoretical and practice framework that I present here. I still consider it to be a work in progress, but at this time I consider it to be a work well worth sharing with others as a set of critical theories to be used in what I hope will be an emancipatory process for users of this course. I'll try to explain that idea of an emancipatory process and what I mean by all that in this session. So, what is inclusive education? In 2005, Education Queensland put out an inclusive education statement, and they defined it by making a number of observations about what it looks like and what it sets out to achieve. Let's take a few minutes to read what they say. Inclusive education fosters a learning community that questions disadvantages and challenges social injustice. It maximises the educational and social outcomes for all students through the identification and reduction of barriers to learning, especially for those who are vulnerable to marginalisation and exclusion. It ensures all students understand and value diversity so that they have the knowledge and skills for positive participation in a just, equitable and democratic global society. Inclusive education ensures that schools are supportive and engaging places for all students, teachers and caregivers. It is about building communities that value, celebrate and respond to diversity. It is underpinned by respectful relationships between learners, teachers and caregivers. It is supported by collaborative relationships with communities and governments. It is about shaping the society in which we live and the type of society to which we aspire. Now, reading this statement, it's clear that there are two overarching messages contained within it. I see those messages to be, first, that inclusive education is an education that is for all students, irrespective of their differences, and second, that inclusive education is an education that encapsulates and fosters a set of social values that combat injustice and favour justice, freedom and democracy. Values that we collectively aspire to in our personal and family lives and in our society. I believe that the way we think about this social justice agenda has significant implications for the way we go about this course. It impacts strongly on its purpose, how we will approach teaching it, and on the intended audience that we have for it. Let me explain. Commonly, social justice is thought of in terms of the allocation of social goods, a distributive view as per John Rawls. Currently, the Gonski Review of School Funding in Australia focuses on this approach very strongly. This is really important. We shouldn't underestimate its importance at all. However, for individuals, this focus is problematic and disempowering sometimes. It's difficult for us as individuals to do anything about distributive injustices, except perhaps to advocate within our political systems. Some years ago, the feminist thinker Iris Marianne Young advocated a more enabling view of social justice that focused on mitigating injustice in people's everyday lives. She defined social injustice as taking two forms. The first is domination, which can be defined as a limitation of a person's capacity for self-determination, and the second is oppression, a limitation of a person's capacity for self-realization. I think that when we start to think of it in these kinds of terms, we can see that these are things that are close to the heart and close to the life of a classroom. The implication, for me, is that creating a socially just community is about finding an optimal balance between maximising self-determination and self-realisation for everyone, wonderful goals, but there are constraints and controls necessary for successful communal living. The classroom really brings this home to us. Stated in this way, social injustice can appear a little bit remote and on the margins of everyday life, either in the classroom or elsewhere in our lives. A key to changing this remoteness is to realise that domination, oppression, self-determination, self-realisation are really all about how people treat each other. In our everyday lives, our experience of social justice comes down to our relationships, the way we think about, feel about and behave towards other people, and the way that other people think about, feel about and behave towards us. There's ample evidence in our world that domination and oppression in the ways that people relate to each other is very common. The incidence of abuse and neglect of children, family breakdowns and domestic violence, crimes against people and their property all reflect the presence of domination and oppression in people's lives. Whilst the ongoing incidents and the horrors of wars between and within nations demonstrate clearly that we're far from eliminating them from our communal lives. Now, I'm really aware that these terms domination and oppression don't always sit well with teachers. It's really hard to see what part domination and oppression can play in the classroom. Surely we're not into domination and oppression in classrooms. If that's what we think, then perhaps we should look at these research findings by Kirsten Olsen, which is cited by Tomlinson and Imbo in their 2010 book, Leading and Managing a Differentiated Classroom. Olsen reported that virtually all of the adults she interviewed felt profoundly wounded by school. Her definition of wounded by school, it as she said, does not include the inevitable moments of discomfort that occur when large numbers of young people share the same classroom, or the kinds of natural bumps and bruises that help us to grow. Her definition of wounded was the hurt that diminishes individuals in their own eyes, that doesn't go away even in adulthood, and that cannot be dismissed even if the victim achieves success in the eyes of the world. Common results of such wounding that emerged in Olson's research included a loss of pleasure in learning, a belief that we're not smart or competent in learning, a belief that our abilities are fixed and cannot be improved, even with effort, coaching and self-understanding, a belief that we're just average in a way that feels diminishing to us, an anger towards teachers and others in authority because we feel that we're not seen or acknowledged by them, a tendency to categorize people as smart or dumb, a generalized feeling of shame that came from school and produces generalized anxiety, a sense that school diminishes us cognitively, and a low appetite for intellectual risk-taking. In other words, the desire to get the right answer and just finish the job and get it over with. Now, these findings resonate really strongly for me. They resonate with my own experiences when I think back to my own school days. They also resonate with my observations of adults' thoughts about their experience of schooling, both for themselves and for their children, in work I do with people who are seeking assistance in improving their relationships within their families. Education Queensland's inclusive education statement includes the line, inclusive education, is underpinned by respectful relationships between learners, teachers and caregivers. In this course, we will spend a lot of time thinking about the meaning and implications of that statement. Tomlinson and Imbo note that Olson also held a great hope out from her findings. She found that people also reported that there were some teachers who heal wounds. The behaviours of those teachers, as reported, align strongly with the concept of respect that I will focus on in this course. I would argue that this focus is essential both in establishing respectful relationships between students and their families and with teachers. It's also a major step in assuring that students are included in classrooms and schools, because modelling and teaching how to relate to others respectfully is an essential ingredient in school education's contribution to building a society that values social justice, freedom and democracy. So I think we can start to explain the purpose of this course. Firstly, to articulate the kinds of educational practice that will successfully meet the needs of the diverse range of students that are to be found in Australian classrooms. I trust that a tangible and practical output from the course for all participants will be a knowledge of a tool bag of inclusive curriculum strategies that they can use for this purpose, and thus assist in assuring that all of the students they teach can fully access and participate in their classrooms. But there's also a deeper outcome, an outcome of developing an understanding of how we can modify our practices so that they mitigate any tendencies towards injustice in the forms of domination and oppression. A focus upon ensuring that they are consistent with a set of social values built around the ideas of social justice, freedom and democracy. Now, there's also another implication of this social justice agenda, and that's on the way we actually go about our own learning in the course. The overarching approach, which I believe is most consistent with the social justice agenda, is that of an emancipatory orientation to knowledge and an emancipatory process. Now, these terms need a little bit of explanation. The social justice agenda is grounded in critical social science, and in a lot of ways, the father of critical social science is the German philosopher Jürgen Habermas. He suggests in his theory of knowledge constitutive interests that different branches of science have different orientations to knowledge. I'll quote, "The task of the empirical analytical sciences incorporates a technical cognitive interest. That of the historical hermeneutic sciences incorporates a practical interest. And the approach of the critically orientated sciences incorporates the emancipatory interest." An expansion and an explanation of these three interests in knowledge, as explained by Shirley Grandy, I've brought together on this next slide. The technical interest is a fundamental interest in controlling the environment through rule-following action based on empirically grounded laws, whereas the practical interest is an interest in understanding the environment through interaction based on consensual interpretation of meaning. The emancipatory interest is an interest in emancipation and empowerment to engage in autonomous actions arising out of authentic critical insights into the social construction of human society. Difficult stuff. Let's talk about it a little bit more and think about what Habermas had to say about that. Habermas acknowledged the immense contributions that knowledge generated by all three of these interests had made to human history. However, he identified major problems for humans in the generation and application of knowledge via both the technical and the practical interest. In short, the problems are that when both these approaches are used, there's a likelihood that restraints will be placed on the capacity of humans for self-determination and self-realization. That's the likelihood of injustice. The focus on controlling the technical interests often leads to an emphasis on controlling other human beings by treating them as objects like any other parts of the environment. And although the emphasis on consensus in the practical interests sounds as though it might bring more chance of social justice, in practice the consensus is usually a false one, where the voices of the most powerful in our society prevail. So Habermas advocates strongly for balancing these problems by adopting the kind of critically reflective practices that align with the emancipatory interest. Habermas drew on his observation of the work of Sigmund Freud to articulate what he called an emancipatory process that the critical social scientist should follow. And in this course we'll try to follow this kind of emancipatory process. In step 1, critical theorems about curriculum practices drawn from the educational literature and thus already authenticated by empirical and hermeneutical processes will be put forward for your consideration. Then, in the second stage, you'll be invited to critically reflect upon these and firstly to re-authenticate them for yourself by checking the extent to which they resonate with your own experiences of the world. And then secondly, should you find them to be authentic, to consider what extra insights they give you into the issues you face in assuring your survival and well-being and your success in achieving your goals. Habermas referred to this second stage as the organization of a process of enlightenment. And finally, you'll be invited to make prudent decisions on what actions to take in your professional and personal lives in the light of any authentic insights you have gained from the course. In essence, this is a process of critical self-reflection on our behavior and practice in the light of authentic theory. This course is structured with the notion in mind that this is the core behavior that everyone involved in the educational process would benefit personally from adopting, and that it will in turn assist them greatly in assuring both more inclusive education and a more socially just society. Thus, we can add to our purposes for this course a clause about what our overarching approach will be to achieving the already established goals. My purpose in this course is not focused upon instructing participants what teachers and educators should or should not be doing in their curriculum practices. Rather, it's upon putting forward and sharing information that I know has been authenticated both by the empirical and hermeneutical processes of education academics and by my own reflections upon them in the context of my own life experiences, and then inviting participants in turn to reflect upon them and their relevance to their own aspirations. This is an orientation, an emancipatory orientation to teaching and learning process that I find to be consistent with the kind of social justice agenda that I've just been articulating. And finally, I believe that the social justice agenda has implications for the intended audience of the course. This course is about teaching. It's designed to assist teachers in making their practice more inclusive. However, I believe that the social justice agenda of inclusive education makes the practice of teachers the business of a much wider audience than just those who teach. In the opening line of Education Queensland's Inclusive Education Statement, Roger Slee, a leading Australian thinker on social justice in education, is quoted as saying, "Inclusive education is for everybody and it's everybody's business." The intended audience for this course is therefore anyone with an interest in school education and the role it can play in the lives of young people and through them in shaping the kind of society that we aspire to. So, to sum up, inclusive education is about two things. It's about assuring the optimal participation of all students and their families in schools, and ensuring that our practices are consistent with and promote a set of social values that foster justice, freedom and democracy in people's personal and communal lives. The overarching approach that I advocate to achieve this is the adoption of an emancipatory process of critical self-reflection on our behaviour and practice in the light of authentic theory. The key foci of the theory that I will put forward in this course are designing and implementing inclusive strategies and building respectful relationships. And finally, the intended audience of this course is anyone, teachers or anyone else with an interest in making school education more inclusive. I look forward to your comments, your questions, your feedback. Please share your responses to this session on the Teaching to Difference website, which you can see the address of here, and I look forward to you joining me in the next session. Thank you.